was in Vancouver last November and in August, Bridget, but Bridget was reminding me that it was that day that President Zelensky was in the Oval Office. And so I'll get back to that. But I wanted to say hi to my dear colleagues, obviously, Jill McKnight, my dear friend, and also Sports Minister from BC, Hetty. A legend, who must say. Hetty, it's good to see you here. And of course, thank you, Walter, for hosting us. Why I was alluding to that anecdote of last time I was here nearly a year ago is we know that geopolitics have not gone better, to say the least. When you look at even the start of the year, you've seen Venezuela, a very complicated Middle East war right now affecting all of us, and at the same time, the trade war that continues. And in that sense, there are many things that we can't control. We can't control what's going on in this much more dangerous and chaotic world. We can't control what's going on south of our border. But clearly, we can control what we're doing here at home. And building one strong economy is extremely important. And so what we said as a government is that we would be protecting jobs, particularly in the sectors that are tariff. We know here the forestry industry is deeply affected, and we'll fight for our workers and our businesses. And at the same time, we will continue to create jobs, notwithstanding that. And so we've been really working hard to be able, in this chaotic world, to invest even more in defense. And I'll get to why it's so important, but fundamentally, Canada has been lagging for years at the NATO table, not being able to reach its 2% of the GDP in defense. And so this year, within 10 months, we were able to get there, to invest the $60 billion necessary, and it is the first time since the fall of the Berlin Wall that we were able to reach 2%. I think it's going to round up. And so why are we doing it? We're doing this to protect our sovereignty, to be able to equip our strong men and women, defending our sovereignty, making sure that we can project deterrence, being able to be strong at home, but we're also doing it to keep peace, because more we're able to deter, we are able also to protect ourselves and keep peace. And what does peace mean? It means prosperity. It means that we're able to thrive economically and offer good jobs to people and good quality of life. Now, when you think about it, what we've done over the past, how much we've invested in defense, well, we know that national security and economic security go hand in hand. And as a nation, we've gone through it. And why do I say that? Why do I say that we've invested in defense so much in the past? Well, in 1939, when Canada enters the war, we have nearly no industrial capacity. By June 1943, the Globe and Mail was writing that 900,000 men and women are building each week across the country 80 planes, 4,000 motor vehicles, 450 armored vehicles, ammunition, ships, and more. That's every week. And so here in BC, the industrial and military capabilities during the war just exploded. Because the shipbuilding industry, which was really powered mainly by Burrard Dry Dock, built half of all the wartime cargo ships and vessels that were important for us. And also, this was the bedrock which would become later CSPAC. At the time, there were 13,000 people working in North Vancouver, not far from me. And it was for the first time, women were able to work at the shipyard. And since there was a workforce shortage, 7% of nearly all the workforce was women. And so, today, C-SPAN is delivering and delivered last November, and that's exactly why I was here, the new science vessel for the Coast Guard. We know also that there's an important aerospace sector here in BC. I'll be going to Abbotsford, Cascade later today, and tomorrow I'm going to Diabloland on Vancouver Island. And we know that they do important work also for Canadian Armed Forces. And so my point is we've done it before. We can do it again. We can make sure that we can protect ourselves, but meanwhile, we can create jobs. And so that's why we came up with the first defense industrial strategy since the Second World War. That's a big thing. It's the biggest industrial policy we've ever had in more than 70 years. It is the most financed because it's basically $500 billion of funding. And it is life-changing for many, many sectors. And so that's why I wanted to be able to talk to you about it. Because we are now at 2%, 60 billion. We will get to 5% by 2035, and which will be $500 billion. It is 125,000 new jobs that will be created through this. Right now, on average, we're giving contracts to Canadian companies at 42%. Our goal is clearly stated, it will get to 70%. We want to increase the revenues in the sector by 240%. And we want to increase exports. We want to make sure that we increase by 50% the export revenues. So not only is C-SPAN important, but we want C-SPAN important for Canadian Armed Forces. We want to make sure that C-SPAN can sell to the world. And so, we've done many things already. We've signed a safe agreement with Europe, which means that we have access to also an important, very major procurement agreement. We have invested also in the European Space Agency, $500 million. And I know it's a big day for Artemis, and we'll talk about that, but we're also working with our European partners. We've just launched also the new Borealis project, which is basically to make sure that all our universities, especially here in BC, are able to have access to support and research funding for dual use funding. We have just bought 6 planes from Bombardier. We've just launched also a new innovation center for drones back in Ottawa. We've launched the BDC defense sector, which is basically BDC being able to provide funding, over $6 billion worth of funding, of support, of equity to many of your companies and companies in BC that want to pivot, that want to launch new products, that want to be able to seize new markets. And at the same time, we've made sure that we would be even investing more in our national shipbuilding strategy, and I'll get back to that. But fundamentally, what is at the core of the strategy is IT. We need to make sure that we invest in our companies and in our research labs and in our universities to develop IP, but we want that IP commercialized, and we want also to have control over our IP. We won't be putting ourselves again in a position of vulnerability. And so, Walter referred to it, the idea of the defense industrial strategy is to build, to partner, to buy. On va être capable de construire, on va être capable de faire des partenariats, ou encore on va être capable de faire, bien entendu, être capable d'acheter. And so, the build, partner, buy approach. I'll give you an example with build again. The rule will be to build. So, national shipbuilding strategy, C-SPAN, best example I can give. But another example I could give for BC is as you have a life science sector that is thriving and innovating, and I'll have good news to announce tomorrow, so stay tuned. We think that the life science sector can be dual use and can be really, really important as we want to Support, yes, the commercialization for medical research, etc., commercialization in the pharma sector, but we think that these investments can be very key also for our Canadian armed forces and for our allies. Also, there's a lot of digital companies here. We think that we can really have our defense investments supporting made in Canada digital technologies, and therefore we can build them here. If we can't build, then we will partner. And what does that mean? Well, in certain sectors, sometimes you need to be able to partner. And so I'm thinking obviously of aerospace, because in aerospace, you need to be able to have, yes, a company such as Bombardier building the plane, but they may want to work with Saab, which is a Swedish company that can really help them add the technology, and you have a surveillance plane that can be built here, can be supported also out west, but can be sold to Korea, can be sold to France, can be sold to Germany, can be sold to the UAE. And so that's the example I can give you about partnering. And yesterday I was with the CEO, on the phone with the CEO of Airbus, and that's exactly the type of conversations we're having. How can we, invest in Canada, but at the same time, how can we partner with some of your companies here? And meanwhile, if we can't build, and if we can't partner, well, then we will buy. And that will be the exception. But when we buy, we will make sure that we get some good paying jobs for Canadians, and we will have an ITB policy, sorry for the jargon, some may know what it means, which is the industrial technological benefits policy, which is about mainly being able to create a supply chain across the country. And the best example I can give you then, and obviously Jill and I have been working with Stephen Scheer and many ministers and Minister McGuinty on this, is the submarine deal. And so it's a big competition between TKMS which is the German consortium with Norway, and also with Onwa, which is a Korean company, and our goal is to land jobs in BC and across the country. So all that will be supported also by our Buy Canada policy. Aluminum is important for this province. We want to make sure that we are supporting everything linked to our defense industrial strategy with aluminum coming from BC. Now, how do you decide whether you will build or you will partner? What's the rule here? Well, we've made sure that we have a list of sovereign capabilities. Sovereign capabilities that mean that when it is in that sector, you have no choice but to build. And so, I'll give you an example, everything linked to shipbuilding, everything linked to aerospace, everything linked to digital system, training, simulation, etc. And so, that's extremely important because it means more jobs at Cascade, more jobs at Diapason. Because if we buy from a big company, maybe Airbus, Boeing, whatsoever, there will be jobs for maintenance and repair. And obviously, BC is extremely well located, well positioned in the West to be able to have access to these contracts. Because we understand as a government that companies rather have contracts than subsidies. And there's nothing like having a contract from the federal government, because then you can leverage it. You can go see either your shareholders, your other clients, you can sell to the world. It gives you credibility. And that's the goal of this strategy, to be able to leverage your strengths. And so all that will be organized through a new Defense Investment Agency. And the DIA is now chaired by Doug Guzman, who has extensive knowledge in business. It is Stephen Scheer, who is Secretary of State for military procurement, that is in charge of working with Doug Guzman. And so things are going fast. And now, in the next year in terms of defense procurement coming, either that will be launched, awarded, or delivered. We're talking for the Navy. 12 submarines, 15 river-class destroyers, 6 Arctic and offshore patrol ships, 2 heavy polar icebreakers. That's for the Navy. For the Air Forces, there's a decision that will have to be made regarding fighter jets and training also for these fighter jets. In terms of space, we will have a bid for satellite communications, so meaning satellites, but also operations. And on the Army front, there will be a contract awarded for ammunitions. And so, all that to say, a lot of new contracts, a lot of new investments by the government, and we know that our investments in defense can be helpful to help certain sectors affected by the tariffs. We're very much aware that this can be used as an economic stimulus. And these are the very conversations that I'm having with different people here in BC and including with the Premier tomorrow. And so my point is we're going through an entire change in culture, because for too long we have underinvested in our Canadian Armed Forces, and we didn't really have that vision of creating jobs through defense investments. That is changing. Many countries, all NATO countries, are increasing their investments. We need to be able to create back industrial capacity in this country. We need also to be able to grab a piece of the cake of defense investments in the world. And so I look forward to working with you on this. It's a big opportunity that we need to be able to seize. But, well, of course, we'll do our work. I really hope you can do your work also, particularly in your big company, because we need to make sure that our small and medium-sized businesses are able to have access to these contracts. In the policy, it is written for every time you will be working and investing in a small business, there will be more points allocated in the bidding process to make sure that we do concretely support our efforts here. So, looking forward to answer the very difficult and nasty questions of Bridget, but thank you so much for Okay, I'm ready.
Okay. Right, I'm not quite ready. There we go. I will put slide of questions.
I think it's like my 5th or 6th time coming.
I think so. I was actually speaking to somebody in the earlier room. For sure it's 4. It might be 5.
Yeah.
And that's exactly where I want to start the conversation. If I think about the conversations we've had, first, thinking back even when it was maybe a year and a half ago to that moment where President Zelensky was in the White House, you were Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Yes.
We have had conversations because of when you had the regional development agencies. We talked about Pacific Can, and now here you are, the Minister of Energy. Exactly. So, well, that was really the government. But I gave lots of input.
You supported me in doing it.
Yes,
Thank you.
and I gave you a few ideas, maybe. But here we are now, Minister of Industry, and so talking about this defense industrial strategy, and British Columbia has its own defense industrial strategy. So, you have, I think, a different kind of understanding and perspective of British Columbia because of the roles that you've held in government, and because you've visited British Columbia quite a bit as well. And it also crosses over to our trade capacities. We have Canada's largest port here. So from your perspective, where do you see British Columbia's role in the federal government's strategy, and how do we best leverage the opportunities for us here at home?
How I see, yes, investments in defense in general. I think lots of regions of the country have specificities and strengths, and we need to be able to work, with businesses for them to know what's going on in Ottawa and be able to adapt to what is going on, obviously, on the ground here. And so I've been working a lot with the Premier and with the Mr. Callan, and obviously with my colleagues, which have a lot of projects and are always interested in us investing. But I really think that there's a lot of possibility on the shipbuilding side. I really think that, when you look at it, the national shipbuilding strategy is mature at this point. It's been in place for 50 years. Companies have been able to develop the expertise, train the employees, and really be able to think about what's next, not only the next contract by the Navy, but fundamentally what else do they do? And I want them to become even more entrepreneurial. And so that's why I really think that there's a possibility of building for other countries, of exporting. And so that's one point. Because I really think that that's where the value will come and the job creation will be. The other thing also that I think is really important is that you're not seeing as much around the country. The biotech sector is extremely strong here. And I think that in that sense, linked to the defense investment, BC can really position itself.
I think the potential around the term is dual use. I think really for the business community to understand the opportunities of what that means when it comes to life sciences is something that is maybe becoming a bit more known.
And yes, and at the same time, life science, biotech, BC is really good at creating, because you have such a fantastic university ecosystem, great possibility of developing research, quantum, fusion. I was just at General Fusion. We need to help these companies to be able to, how can I say, grow, be able to offer the right type of capital, to be able to have, I'm sorry, I'm turning my back, that's not my goal, but to be able to have access to the type of financing for them to stay here. And not to move, because you are really at the cutting edge of what it, when you look at innovation. Quantum fusion, a lot of countries would like to have these capacities, and Sue's saying yes.
A lot of potential, but let's talk targets, because BC's Look West strategy has a goal target of 35% of federal defense vessel contract spending by 2035. That's where BC wants to get through its Look West strategy. Is that a realistic goal, and how does BC do that?
Well, there are 3 shipyards. So, if I put it for you.
I'm thinking about aligning with the federal priorities, looking to that.
Well, of course these will be open bids. And I can't, I know you would want me to say, Bridget, yes, this is exactly what we'll do.
That's what we like.
But, I know, but, what is our job also back home is to be able to have job creation through defense investment across the country in an equal fashion, in a way that makes sense to people and makes sense also to our Canadian armed forces. But that's my point. I want to be able to push our really great companies to be able, yes, to build for us, but to build for others. There will be protectionism in a lot of countries. And we've been able to open the doors and counter a form of protectionism even within the EU by being able to access the safe agreement, which is, in the safe agreement, which is the Canada-EU agreement on defense. And so we should think differently. We should be able to sell vessels to other countries, to sell the latest biotech, how can I say, commercial products also to different countries. And we have to be, very strong in lobbying for our own companies. Because, trust me, France will be doing that. Germany will be doing that. The UK as well. So we should not be scared of championing our champions. And so, as for C-SPAN having access to contracts. Obviously, there are only, three shipyards that are part of the strategy, and our goal is to build on the capabilities that we've been able to build over the past 15 years.
You talk about thinking differently, and in your remarks you spoke about the role of larger companies, the role of small and medium enterprises, of which Vancouver has many small and medium enterprises. So I believe I heard that the Defence Investment Agency is expected to reduce its $100 million minimum for handling contracts.
Yeah.
That threshold is going to come down. Do you know when that threshold will come down and what that will be? Are we talking 50 or 25? I mean, what does that look like for small
So
and medium
we're
enterprises?
actively talking about this back home and back in Ottawa, but at the same time, right now there are lots of movements in Ottawa because there are lots of people that used to work at defense or at procurement or at ISED that are now going to this agency, and so that's why there's a capability. How can I say? They're building up the capabilities. The goal for the Defence Investment Agency will be not only to be, yes, awarding, dealing with procurement processes, awarding contracts, but it will be also, and the Prime Minister was very much inspired by what he saw when he was in charge of the Bank of England, what the UK is doing, which they have this Defence Investment Agency. And basically, they can also have conversations with other militaries in the world to be able to push their own homegrown champions and talents, and being able to say, well, you know what, yes, indeed, we may buy you some submarines, but you will buy us planes, and you will be able to buy some of our icebreakers or science vessels. So that's also part of being able.
That threshold itself, that is still in process.
Yeah, and of course we know more it goes down, more it will be easier for smaller companies.
Okay, so I can't believe that we're almost like we're getting the clock's ticking down. I don't like that. We've got lots of questions here, so do you. Okay, so I'm going to go to Slido.
Yeah.
There is a question here. I like this first question. So from your perspective, because of this shift in our economic landscape and the shift really around defense and industrial strategy, what do you think is one of the one shift that maybe the Canadian business community is underestimating? What does it need to catch up to the government's thinking on this to be able to accelerate it faster?
So when I talk about defense, in my mind, I have mainly manufacturing and mainly research in mind. Because the manufacturing sector is a sector that we've been too dependent on the U.S. We need to change that. And meanwhile, we're not the only one. There's been offshoring of manufacturing jobs around the world. And now there's a global competition to bring that back. And so manufacturing, Bridget, is going to be important. And it is also a question of being able to protect our own sovereignty, to be able to project deterrence. If you're not able to build things in your own country, it means that you have too many vulnerabilities towards others. And so that is why the manufacturing sector is important. Meanwhile, in the 5% of GDP I'm referring to, which is around $500 billion, there's 1.5 of that is linked to infrastructure. And so we can invest in critical minerals, and critical minerals will be seen as defense investments. And obviously we're having a lot of conversations with tech resources, etc. And I was speaking to John Price again recently. Everything linked to, yes, critical minerals, but critical minerals processing will be also key. And he's super well positioned on that. So I'm just giving you some of what we're thinking back home, because we know that of all the countries within NATO, Canada didn't invest as much in defense. But the fact that we have such important work to do to get to our 5%. It is a real way to be able to build the country. It is real levers that will be job creating. It's as if maybe some of the fact that we were a bit behind now, as the trade war is happening, happening, we have real solutions to be able to address the impacts of tariffs. They're not perfect, as I was saying. The forestry sector, and I can answer any questions, but we need to be able to help with them pivoting. We just did through the BDC, we helped company in Mackenzie. We're able to invest $12 million and protect 250 jobs. But we're actually working at finding solutions to help the sector pivot.
So you have spoken, not just today, but previously as well, the need for Canadian companies to grow and to scale. And
Yeah.
Government plays a role in that and be able to create the conditions for companies to be able to do that. Now there's a question here, it's down a few for the team that's following this on the back, but it's about the kind of shifts that are needed from government to take more of a risk-taking mindset.
Yeah.
Government is pretty risk-averse, where the business community is not, and especially entrepreneurs, I mean, they thrive on that.
Yeah.
So as you're looking at this acceleration from 2 to 5% and this push that you've got for companies to scale and grow, what specifically is the government doing to stretch itself to become less risk averse?
Well, I feel that there is a change of culture also at the federal government level. We are way more risk taker. We talk all the time to the business community. And if you want me to come next month back here, no problem. I'll be back. But we are approached by many business people to invest in many different projects, and we're building also maybe through Pacific Hand, through the BC, through ISED, the support for businesses. So, it seems very theoretical of 2% of GDP. Actually, the money is hitting the ground running, and companies are starting to get contracts. The procurement delay used to be 3-4 years. It will, the submarine procurement would have lasted 3-4 years. We were able to reduce that at least by a year and a half by just saying, okay, well, there will be 2 bidders, and we're, reducing the list. And now, we can expect in the coming months a decision. We're taking decisions very, very quickly. And so, coming in, you were saying, oh, things are going fast. Well, yes, things are going fast. And I feel that. I really feel that we're in a moment where we're in a trade war. We have no choice. And so, I don't think the government is such there now. I'm super interested in understanding what is the red tape like. What are, how can, because sometimes, yes, there's red tape, but sometimes it's whether companies want to take the risk or not. And, there's unpredictability and whether it's worth it to take a risk. But I think also that those who take risks will be rewarded. Thinking of, going into the defense sector, for example, it will be let's say you're a company that supports C-SPAN. Well, you may think, well, is it worth it investing even more? There's a good chance that there will be more contracts and even more capacity asked from different companies. So investing in productivity would make sense. And so, you understand my point.
I want to get your perspective on the Defense Security and Resilience Bank. The Board of Trade, a few people are in the group here, people have just heard about that, back in then, have worked on the steering committee with the BC government to put in a bid to be chosen if Canada is chosen as the host country for the bank, that Vancouver would be the city where it would be situated. And it's important because it is 3,500 jobs maximum. I know that there are negotiations that started recently in Montreal, but thinking about it more broadly from the Canadian perspective, why is this an important opportunity for Canada? And does Vancouver stand a chance? I mean, I think it's got a great chance for the tri-continental bridge, if you like, between Asia Pacific and Europe and Arctic. And there's a number of strategic reasons why Vancouver would be the best place for this. But, putting all of that aside, why is this an important opportunity for Canada, and how advanced are negotiations on this?
Well, it is important. There's two aspects to the bank that are important. There's the financing, and there's also the procurement side. So, right now, the main issue is to bring more countries to the table to talk about the creation of this bank. So this is an idea. It is, yes, a bank, but fundamentally it's a multilateral organization. There have been a couple of countries that have been part of the discussions. Good news, the first conversations, the first talks were held in Canada. The second round is happening, I think, next week. And the third round of conversations will be happening before the end of April. So things are going fast. But last week I was still in conversations with countries, including countries, Arctic countries such as Scandinavian countries, to bring them more on board because not everybody is at the level of interest in the bank as we are. And so we need to make sure that we bring more countries to the table, more G7 countries to the table.
Allies, the NATO allies.
For the creation of the bank. And then we'll talk about which country will be, hosting this bank, and then eventually which city. And I know there's a very strong competition.
Yes, Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa, Vancouver.
Yeah.
But first Canada has to.
Well, that's my point. That's my point.
We really are running okay. Let's do some rapid fire questions here. Okay, so I want to talk to you. You mentioned Borealis. So the first one is in Halifax, but we are working here in British Columbia, the province, and some from the private sector working to pitch a quantum dish hub. So what is your advice to be successful in that process?
Well, I think you've picked a really good, a good subject because quantum makes sense. Because, AI is extremely important. Quantum is the next level. And I've had the frustration, which I know is shared by the PM, which is we're so good at research, we're so good at, discovering insulin and, discovering AI, but we need to be able to commercialize it. We need to be able also to keep the companies.
So we're well positioned. How do we get it over the line?
I think more you're organized, better it will be. And then Borealis has a lot of funding. It's under the Defense Department, and more you're able to bring everybody on board here in BC and have the BC government supporting it, which I think will be the case, the better. And it's good they're talking to you about it.
That's right. It's on your radar now.
Yeah.
ITBs, which is Industrial and Technological Benefits Policy, but here in British Columbia, many partners have had difficulty being able to access this. So what is your advice to those companies and those organizations trying to do that?
I think there was definitely an issue with the ITB policy before because it was all about the ITB policy rather than building in the country. We've changed that paradigm. So now it will be build, partner, or buy. Then if it's buy, then it's the ITB policy, which my team and I are in charge of. But we are getting involved in the building here and the partnering here. So that's my first point. In terms of ITB policies, we actually, in the Defense Industrial Strategy, presented a proposal, which was to, obviously increase the levels of ITB that companies from abroad would have to, to abide by to be able to get the contract. So basically, we want to increase the number of jobs being created across the country when offering a contract to a foreign company. And so I think it will be, it is, I think it depends, and I think that there will be some really positive changes that will have an impact here.
Okay, the most fun question for last here. So in about maybe an hour, the window opens for blast off for Artemis 2, and you oversee the Canadian Space Agency. I think you recently spoke to Jeremy Hansen.
Yes, yesterday.
Just yesterday. So talk to us about the significance of this opportunity for Canada's involvement and its involvement and evolution really in the space industry.
Well, it is important because the space industry is a real one, and a one that will actually, some would say, the next frontier of defense is space. And so we are very good at space telecommunication. We have built the right satellites over the years, and we think we'll operate them. We have sovereign capabilities on that. But that has always been linked to the research that we were doing with the investment of the Canadian Space Agency. And we, as a country, were able to agree with NASA nearly 4 years ago to have one of our astronauts to be part of Artemis 2, which is going to the moon, which has not been done in many, well,
20 years.
Yeah, that's it. So Jeremy is ready. His mindset is really good. He was saying to me, I've been stressed quite a lot, but actually in the last few hours, for 24 hours, I've been very, very much focused and calm. So he's been working for years on this. I spoke to him, and I've been in contact with him because we wanted to make sure that also Jeremy would continue to be part of the core team of astronauts, 3 Americans and obviously 1 Canadian. And so it's going ahead. It's been postponed many times. We thought it would be in February and then, in March and now in April. So weather has been changing, but we're confident and we're extremely proud. And I think we'll be, a lot of Canadians will be watching, and there are watch parties as we speak right now across the country, but also at the Canadian Space Agency. You know what? I'd rather be with you guys.
Well, isn't that a great way to end the conversation, Minister? Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.